Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and it's Tuesday, week 12. We're going to go through every single player and whose matchup is good. We're going to show you charts for every position. Are they a plus matchup or a big downgrade this week for every player? So last week, I posted this video after the start sits, and I think it might be more useful as the first video to frame our overall thinking. Where are the best and worst matchups? And then tomorrow, I'll give you all those start sit decisions for every game. But let us begin at quarterback. This chart is the one I referenced. In blue, we got season-long points per game averages for the quarterback position, and then in red, just the last 4 games. So number one is not a surprise if you've been focusing on these matchups in the past. Dallas has been good all year. They're getting a little more difficult lately. I think after last week, we might be seeing a more difficult matchup for a while. That defense looks a little more legit. A lot of players have been added since the bye week, whether it's via trade or just guys getting healthy. So Jalen Hurts does get the best matchup on paper, but I would consider Drake Maye perhaps a more appealing candidate to have the best matchup. Drake Maye gets the Bengals, who in the last 4 games are up to just shy of 26 points per game, and on the year do rank second, giving up 21.6. So Jalen Hurts, Drake Maye, both of them are good enough to always be in your lineup, so I think they're no-brainers this week. But when it comes to Drake Maye, let's take a look at those stats. They give up the most passing touchdowns of any team in that stretch, 12 passing touchdowns in the last 4 games. So you would expect 3 touchdowns for Drake Maye this week, especially if he gets Booty back. That might help, but if Travion does vulture him again, perhaps it's less than 20 points, like it was against the Jets. The third best matchup this week goes to Jared Goff, who has had some great games. Last week was really tough against Philly, but this week against the Giants, at home especially, should be a big bounce back week. I expect Goff to give you 20 points for sure. I also think Jacoby Brissett is earning a lot of trust. Really good matchup for him, and last week was insane. Over 400 passing yards without Marvin Harrison Jr. We know McBride is dominant. If he can make Michael Wilson legit, then Kyler Murray is probably the most overrated quarterback we've seen in a while. So Brissett, probably a good streaming quarterback, definitely going to be an interesting pickup off the wire. I imagine he's pretty coveted. So good matchup here. Jacksonville is top 4 on the year, top 5 in the last month, but we thought this matchup was good for Justin Herbert last week, or at least I did, and I was really burned. Herbert did get injured in that game briefly. He came out, came back, but I think they just checked out before the bye. Last week was such a big disappointment. So maybe you don't want to believe in some of these stats. Maybe a lot of these statistics don't mean anything come Sunday. But on paper in the last month, Jacksonville still is allowing the second most passing touchdowns in that stretch. I know Herbert was dog shit last week, but on average, the Jags are a good matchup lately. But next matchup is on bye. Washington is not on the slate this week, and so are the number 7 matchup, Miami. But sandwiched right between them is Tampa Bay, so Stafford getting an upgrade here. The Bucs just gave up 6 touchdowns to Josh Allen. I don't fear the Bucs defense, but that is a different skill set. Stafford is getting it done strictly in the passing game. Allen did have 3 rushing touchdowns. You're not getting that for Matthew Stafford, but I still think this matchup isn't scary. I would expect more likely a shootout on Sunday night. The Rams, I'm still going to bet on their offense. Next up, after the Dolphins, who are on bye, would be San Francisco, who's been a top 2 matchup in the last month. Bryce Young was insane last week, another 400-yard passer we didn't expect in Week 11. Bryce Young should play well. The Niners' defense is really depleted and giving up really good fantasy stats for the quarterback position. But I don't know if I trust last week's Brissett outlier to repeat, but if Bryce Young put up an outlier, maybe it's destined to happen. On paper, at least, the Niners are the second best quarterback matchup you can find in the last 4 games. So good luck with Bryce Young. I don't really trust him, but maybe he'll throw for 2+ touchdowns. The Niners in the last 4 weeks have allowed 10 passing touchdowns. Next matchup goes to Aaron Rodgers, who plays Chicago this week. The Bears are a good spot. They did limit J.J. McCarthy in division last week. McCarthy didn't run for some reason, but on paper, the Bears are not a defense to worry about. They are pretty above average on the year in every category. So if Rodgers does play, he does own Chicago. You might factor that in. Maybe that's why he's pushing to play. He really wants that win before he has to retire. However, I don't know what the status of his hand really is, and it is possible we get Mason Rudolph. I would not be trusting Rudolph as much as I would Rodgers. But Rodgers with a broken hand doesn't sound that safe either. If Rodgers plays, I don't think he'll be elite. So I would rather avoid that matchup. Next matchup is top 10, goes to Lamar Jackson against the Jets. And Lamar did get a bottom 3 matchup last week against Cleveland in some bad weather. So I would assume he bounces back. I don't fear the Jets. At least 18 points is their average allowed this season. So Lamar not running as much lately. That is limiting the upside, but the floor I still think is somewhat safe. I do not fear the Jets defense. I also don't really fear the Steelers defense, especially on the road. At home, it's a different situation. The Steelers defense is playing well at home. But on the road at Chicago, I'm not as convinced Caleb Williams will be dog shit, but the Bears often just run the ball as much as possible. So that can limit him. The game script last week wasn't good. Caleb is really like up and down. Caleb, I think, is much safer in best ball. Sadly, he's just not consistent from week to week. The floor just isn't there. So Caleb, good luck there. On average, the Steelers rank as the 16th best matchup, so just league average. If you're starting Caleb, I think it's because you trust him more than you care about this matchup upgrade. Next matchup goes to the Giants starter. I think it'll be Jameis Winston because we've seen a lot of quarterbacks miss multiple games with a concussion lately. I don't know if it's just the league being more strict about it or the concussions just being more severe, but Jackson Dart, I don't know if he's a guarantee to play. The Lions probably give up a lot of garbage time here. I would expect potentially some high-end outcomes for the Giants starter, especially if it's Winston. He could have 3/4 of garbage time, literally, might be down by 30 points by halftime. So Winston's kind of interesting, to be honest, but the Lions last week didn't really give an inch to Jalen Hurts. Darnold gets a positive matchup here. The Titans ranked top 13 on the year. In the last month, they ranked top 3. So Darnold should play really well. They've given up 8 passing touchdowns in the last 4 games. That would be top 7 in that category. So I definitely expect to bounce back. I feel like the way last week went, despite Darnold's 4 interceptions, they were so close to winning that game. I do think it bolstered their confidence. They know they're a good team. The Seahawks should play lights out on offense this week. So I would trust Sam Darnold. I expect a bounce back here. Titans are a good spot, top 3 matchup. And then next matchup goes to Shedeur Sanders. I do expect him to play against Las Vegas, who are a decent, not great matchup, but solid in the last month, allowing 19.3 points per game, up from 16.7. And they've also allowed 8 passing touchdowns in the last 4 games. I wouldn't say I trust the rookie, but I wouldn't say I fear this matchup either. And he has some doubters to prove wrong. Shedeur could have a good spot, especially if he gets the receivers involved. I don't know how valuable Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman are moving forward with Shedeur Sanders. So that's something to keep an eye out on. I'm not convinced I would stream him, but perhaps in good matchups rest of season, if he plays well here, you might upgrade Shedeur Sanders. Joe Flacco gets the next matchup, the New England Patriots, which still ranks slightly above average at 15 and have been a little easier as of late. They've given up 9 passing touchdowns last 4 games, but Jamar Chase is suspended, and then there's also a chance that Joe Burrow does come back from IR. I don't think I would bet on it, but it is possible that Burrow does return. So keep an eye out on him, but Flacco may get his swan song on Sunday against New England. The Saints are the last positive matchup, ranking 16th on the season, but against Kirk Cousins with no Drake London, I do not trust Cousins whatsoever. No thanks at all, especially if you look even closer in the last 4 weeks. They're giving up bottom 3 numbers to the position, less than 9.5 points per game to opposing quarterbacks in the last 4. So Saints defense all of a sudden looking pretty tough. And then these next matchups, with the exception of maybe 2, are in general very bad spots. Definitely the below average matchups on paper. Number 17 goes to Dak Prescott against Philadelphia. I'm worried about that defensive line. They've looked elite since the trade deadline, and I would probably expect a worse game out of Dak Prescott than we saw last week. 4 touchdowns I wouldn't expect to repeat, but in division, you never know, could be a shootout. Both offenses have the pieces, I would probably still start Dak Prescott. Next matchup is a significant upgrade if you look at just the last 4 games. Tyler Shough gets the Falcons, and it almost feels like the Falcons have given up because there is really no indication that their defense can stop anyone. They had some injuries. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. They looked really good at the beginning of the year, but lately they are dog shit. So Tyler Shough off the bye looked pretty solid. Getting a win against the Panthers was kind of impressive, and it looks like he'll be throwing at least 2 passing touchdowns in this game. The Falcons have allowed 10 over the last month, but they are in division. Weird shit can happen. It might be another low-scoring game. The NFC South is often kind of ugly when they face off against each other. So maybe I'm overestimating this matchup, but the Falcons, I think, have checked out. In my opinion, they've just got eliminated from any hope to make the playoffs. No London this week. Penix is out. Cousins has looked terrible. What are they playing for? I think the Falcons will still be a good matchup for Tyler Shough. So I'm going to upgrade him. We'll be ranking him probably top 20. And then Jordan Love gets the Minnesota Vikings. The last matchup left on the chart, giving up over 17 points per game. That ranks top 14 in the last month. But until Jaden Reed comes back to this offense, I don't see the upside with Jordan Love. But maybe now that Josh Jacobs is banged up, they might be forced to be a pass-first team. I do think that is what they should be. However, it doesn't seem to really work out. Jordan Love is still pretty unproven. And at this stage of his career, given his contract, that's not good. So I don't really trust Jordan Love. I don't see much upside. And 17 points, if that's what you're telling me happens, isn't that valuable at the end of the day. So I could see them look ahead to the game after this against the Lions on Thursday. That's a Thanksgiving game, and that'll be much more of a shootout than this one. The Vikings defense, I would assume, plays similar to last week against the Bears. So I don't think I'll be dying to start Jordan Love, but it's not a terrible matchup. Otherwise, moving forward, they're all much more difficult in general. This one is really tough against the Ravens. In the last month, they ranked bottom 5, giving up 9.9 points per game. But on the year, they're still the 20th. So maybe you still don't believe that, but they get Tyrod Taylor. He's going in for Justin Fields, who got benched. I wouldn't bet against it. I do not trust Tyrod Taylor. Not going to push it in my lineup. The Ravens have allowed the fewest passing touchdowns in the last month, only 1 in the last 4 games. So not expecting anything, only some rushing stats to maybe give you like 8 or 10 points. I don't trust Tyrod. Not at all. Seattle is a bottom 12 matchup. They're averaging 14.9 points per game allowed in the last month. So Cam Ward, not expecting him to go over 15 points. I'll pass on Cam Ward. I'm also a bit reluctant to fully endorse Daniel Jones in this game. The Chiefs in the last month have only given up 2 passing touchdowns, and on the season they rank bottom 12, bottom 10 in the last 4 games. So the average they're allowing is 13.5 points per game. That does not sound tempting. I could see this just being a big Jonathan Taylor game. A lot of defense. The season is kind of on the line for the Chiefs. Every game, rest of the year, is a must-win. So Kansas City, with their back against the wall, might really shut him down. I'm not dying to upgrade Daniel Jones. It could be ugly for Daniel Jones. Taylor is really the main piece in that offense. But Mahomes gets the more difficult matchup of the two. The Colts are a little easier in the last month, but on the season rank as a tougher matchup against Mahomes. And they did just add Sauce Gardner before the bye. I imagine their defense getting healthier with some rest and a lot of prep time is going to be pretty difficult here. I don't really like Mahomes as much this week. His schedule's pretty brutal rest of the season. I really don't think he'll be a top 5 quarterback. The rest of the season, I don't expect him to put up elite numbers like he did to start it. In Carolina, that's a tough matchup this week for Brock Purdy. But in the last month, it's getting a little easier, but they've also only given up 3 passing touchdowns. So that is kind of Purdy's calling card. He can give you 3 touchdowns in any given game. I would still just bet on the Niners offense. I like Purdy as a top 12 quarterback pretty much every game. He's kind of bust-proof. The floor from the Niners QB is always in the top 15 or so. So Purdy, a safe play. If you ask me, I don't care that this matchup is difficult. Meanwhile, Trevor Lawrence, I would probably bench. The Arizona matchup might be banged up. They're getting a little easier lately, But on the road, I don't trust Trevor Lawrence as much, and his receiving core is just so injured. I don't really know what to make of it. So maybe Brian Thomas Jr. comes back, but it's also possible that the Cardinals secondary gets healthy. Trevor Lawrence, I think I would just fade. Probably not going to crack my top 16. Baker Mayfield, I think I still trust the talent, though. The Rams defense, however, has been really, really difficult for fantasy purposes. He wasn't that great against the Bills last week. Sean Tucker really stole the show, and Baker could have a bit of a problem if he has the same interception ratio as Darnold last week. So I still expect Baker to throw some touchdowns, but not going to expect elite numbers out of Baker when the Rams are a bottom 7 matchup. The Packers are a tough matchup for JJ McCarthy, and in the last 4 games, they've only given up 3 passing touchdowns. I would not expect McCarthy to cover you. So going to be a defensive battle in division here. McCarthy is not a player I'm going to trust. And CJ Stroud looks like he's ruled out, so Davis Mills gets a tough matchup on paper from Buffalo. In the last month, they're down to giving up just 9.3 points per game. That's down from 14 on the season. So they're bottom 5 every way you look at it. This is not a good spot for Davis Mills. However, their run defense is good. Perhaps with no Stroud, I may take back my Texans pick to win this game. I don't know if I trust them as much without CJ Stroud. But 2 of these bottom 4 matchups are on bye, so we catch a slight break, missing the Chargers, ranked 29th. In the last month, they're the toughest quarterback matchup at 9 points. And then Denver ranks bottom 2 on the season, giving up 10.3 in the last month. They're still bottom 5. So both of them are on bye, which means the 2 toughest matchups go to Geno Smith getting the Browns. I do not trust Geno at all. Maybe you get a touchdown to Brock Bowers, but unless you get a second, there's usually no upside for Geno Smith. And Josh Allen gets the toughest matchup on the slate this week. The Texans on the year are the most difficult, but in the last month, they're getting a little easier, up to 13.9 points per game, which ranks 22nd. So this would be 11th worst, not literally the worst overall. And perhaps after last week, you still don't care about a downgrade on paper. Josh Allen is obviously matchup proof. I apologize for ranking him closer to number 10 last week. I lowered him by about 7 spots, and that looked pretty fucking stupid. So let's move on. Sometimes these matchup stats genuinely are irrelevant, but let's keep them in mind. I do think on average, they do factor in, but there's always exceptions that prove them wrong. This chart focuses on the running back position, and it's the same setup as quarterback, so let's run through it. Number 1 is Cincinnati, who goes up against TreVeyon Henderson this week. So if you held on to TreVeyon, he probably looks like the most important league winner of them all. I am fully on board with starting TreVeyon and not even considering Ramondre's return as a reason to bench him. There is no chance in hell they go back to favoring Ramondre Stevenson. If they do, Mike Vrabel fucking hates us. But after the last couple games, TreVeyon is a lock in the lineup. He looks like a top 5 running back going forward. Buffalo is the second best matchup for Woody Marks and Nick Chubb. So perhaps they really, really limit Davis Mills. But if he hands it off effectively enough, the Bills cannot stop the running back. In the last month, they're down to number 7. So even though they're getting even worse on paper, 27 points per game allowed, there are a few other matchups that are getting even more easy to go up against. So the Bills, a big green light. I would probably start Woody Marks this week. They've allowed 7 touchdowns in the last 4 games to the running back position. That is the most overall that you can find. When it comes to the Bengals, a big upgrade for them is rushing yards. The Bengals allow the most rushing yards to the running back position overall. So both Cincinnati and Buffalo are great spots. TreVeyon a lock in the lineup, and Woody Marks a very enticing flex play with upside. The Giants are a great matchup for the Lions backfield, so expect Detroit to really bounce back. I would absolutely expect Jahmyr Gibbs to be one of the best running backs this week. The Giants are the best matchup in the last month, allowing 31 points per game is well above anyone else other than Atlanta. And Atlanta did give up that 51-pointer to Jonathan Taylor. They rank right behind them in the last month. So the Giants absolutely going to get torched. They give up the second most rushing yards per game and Jahmyr Gibbs will dominate. I would expect Montgomery to also play pretty well. I also just mentioned it. The Falcons are close to as good, and the Jonathan Taylor 51-pointer does obviously skew the numbers a little bit. Rico Dowdle didn't play as good as we perhaps thought, but still, it was very effective. But do you trust Alvin Kamara at this stage of his career off the bye? I guess he'll be fully rested and maybe have some juice. He looked okay last time we saw him, and he seems to really get up and play well in these divisional games. So he still has some pop in him. It's a good matchup, second best in the last month. If you look closer, they're allowing 137 rushing yards per game. That ranks fifth most in that span. They're also giving up 6 touchdowns to the running back position in the last 4 games. That ranks third most in the league. So I would expect Kamara to have some upside here. I do think the Saints win this game, and I expect a bit of a battle between the running back position. So expect Kamara to get an upgrade, but I don't know if he'll crack the top 20. He's been really hard to trust, but the ceiling is a bit higher against the Falcons. The Titans are a good matchup on the year, but lately they've been getting a bit more average, down to just 19.8 points per game. That ranks 14th. So Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet still expected to play really well, but maybe not as good as you might expect. But I'm definitely going to trust them. I would expect at least 1 touchdown here. The Titans are allowing an average of 1.5 touchdowns to the running back position per game dating back to week 1. On the year, all of the running backs score touchdowns on the Titans. So I would trust Charbonnet in the red zone this week, and even Kenneth Walker probably earned a little extra usage. I could see him also score a touchdown, but at least good production. The Titans give up a lot of yards as well. But next matchup goes to Washington, who are on bye, so a good matchup is sadly unavailable. And next matchup goes to Kyren Williams, who gets the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday night. So Bucs are really vulnerable. We just saw Josh Allen run really effectively in the red zone, and Tampa, I don't think will be able to stop Kyren Williams. He always scores touchdowns. The Bucs are giving up a lot. They've allowed 6 of them in the last 4 weeks, which does rank third highest in the league in that category. So barring a vulture from Blake Corum, Kyren Williams will find the end zone. I would lock it in for a Kyren Williams touchdown. Travis Etienne and Bashal Tutin are the next upgrade here on the chart. Arizona is really allowing a lot of points to the running back position. Ranks 8th best matchup in the last month, up to 24.7 points per game. And they are tied for league most 7 touchdowns allowed in the last 4 games. Touchdowns should be there for Etienne and Tutin. Saquon gets another good matchup. Dallas is pretty vulnerable, but has been getting much more difficult lately. They used to rank in the top 3, and right now they rank 9th on the season. If you look even closer, in the last month, they'd be down to 17th, down to 19.1 points per game, which is right there at league average. So Saquon's been pretty mediocre this season. Touchdowns have been the only saving grace for him, and I would not expect, with the addition of Quinnen Williams, for the Cowboys defense to be a cakewalk. In division with Overshown and the loss of Marshawn Nealand, this team, I think, has been galvanized in the last couple weeks, and I don't think they're a good matchup anymore in this category. So Genty didn't do shit on the ground last week. Saquon, I don't think, is playing much better than Genty this year. I worry that Saquon has a really rough game. I would fear the Dallas matchup at this moment in time. Baltimore gets Breece Hall. That's an upgrade on the year, but in the last month, a terrible matchup, even tougher than Dallas, down to 14.3 points per game. So don't let the season-long stats fool you. Saquon and Breece Hall are going to have really rough games this week, in my opinion. Breece, I think, is even less likely to score a touchdown. At least with Saquon, that can save you, but Breece rarely scores in the first place. And then in the last 4 games, the Ravens have only allowed 2 touchdowns to the position. So less than 50-50% Breece scores a touchdown this week. I would not expect that to happen, and I don't expect a lot of yardage either. The Ravens are really stepping up on defense. So good luck with Breece, good luck with Saquon. However, the Javonte matchup isn't that easy either. The Eagles, since the trade deadline, the Eagles defense looks elite. They look like one of the best in the league. They just shut down Jahmyr Gibbs and Dave Montgomery like it was nothing. So I'm not expecting many productive snaps out of Javonte Williams this week. If you look at the last 4 games, the Eagles are only giving up 64 rushing yards per game, which would rank bottom 4 in that span. Not expecting a good game out of Javonte Williams. All 3 of these last matchups, Dallas, Baltimore, and Philly, are looking way, way tougher in the last month. This next matchup also looking tougher. It's Miami, but they are on bye, so kind of irrelevant in week 12. And then the Jets are looking easier in the last month. The Jets also got rid of Quinnen Williams, and their defense I don't expect to improve as the season dwindles down. They will start to check out as the weeks go by, as we get closer to the final week of the season. So Derrick Henry played really well last week. I would trust him yet again. In the last month, the Jets are a top 10 matchup, and they've also allowed 6 running back touchdowns in the last 4 games. That is the 3rd most in that category. So Derrick Henry gets an upgrade. I like Derrick Henry as a good start this week, especially with no Justice Hill. Most likely misses again. Lamar Jackson isn't running as much as we thought. In Carolina, that's also a fantastic matchup. Ranks top 3 in the last month. The Panthers cannot stop the run at all. They get Christian McCaffrey on Monday night. CMC is going to dominate. It's a revenge game for McCaffrey. You were already starting him, but this could be his best game of the year. The Panthers, last 4 games, allowing the 3rd most rushing yards per game and the 3rd most touchdowns to the position, 6 in those last 4 games. Christian McCaffrey will dominate. Even Brian Robinson Jr. might have a solid production in this game. So I like McCaffrey as probably the RB1 this week, but Bijan and Algier get a top 10 matchup as well. At least the last 4 games, the Saints have been vulnerable. On the year, it's more of an average matchup. However, let's focus in the last month. They're allowing the 6th most rushing yards, so Algier, I think, will contribute. And then they're also giving up top 10 numbers in terms of touchdowns. 5 touchdowns to running backs allowed in the last month. So I do think 1 touchdown at minimum will be there. I would expect Bijan to keep rolling. With no London, they should both be on display. I would expect like 40 touches between the two this week at running back. Kenny Gainwell going to get the start. I'm not expecting Jalen Warren to play, but the injury report might bring him back. He gets a decent average matchup against Chicago. And an upgrade or downgrade, they started to get difficult, and then last couple weeks, the Bears' run defense hasn't been as impressive. So Kenny Gainwell, if you trust the volume, then I would start him. I definitely expect a lot of touches for Kenny Gainwell. Next matchup is on bye. The Chargers, an average one, so who cares? The Niners, though, are looking like a more difficult run defense in the last month. We thought their defense was cooked after the injuries, but they're vulnerable in the passing game, not in the run game. So Niners ranked bottom 11 last 4 games. Rico Dowdle may not score a touchdown. They've only allowed 2 of them in the last month. So maybe you trust Dowdle regardless, but I might downgrade him a little bit. I don't think I'm ranking him top 10 like I did last week. Next matchup goes to the Chicago backfield. DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai face off against Pittsburgh. And in the last month, they're giving up 21 points per game. That's not like a massive upgrade, but technically it would rank above average on the season. So maybe you don't care. I know that the Bears are more of a run-first team, though, so I trust the volume. The only difference with this backfield, however, is that you don't know exactly where it's going to go. Last week, Monangai scored a touchdown. There were no other touchdowns available, but Swift was far more effective from a yard standpoint. So I'm 100% starting DeAndre Swift. I'm not going to fear this matchup too much, but I do consider Monangai a low-end flex option, most likely benching him, but if you get a touchdown, you will be saved, and especially if Swift gets hurt again, has some of the highest handcuff value of anyone. This is clearly a team that wants to run the ball. Next matchup goes to Quinshon Judkins facing off against the Raiders, and this one has been average pretty much all year, about 19 points per game allowed. So Judkins, if you're trusting him on a weekly basis, keep him in the lineup. I think he's like an average RB2. In a good matchup, he has the potential to be great, but he also has the potential to be a terrible, terrible play. Last week without a touchdown was proof. However, I do think with Shedeur, the offense could be a little more explosive and dynamic. In the passing game, I think they'll be better, but that might hurt Judkins. given he was dominating in the run game. Next matchup goes to Emmanuel Wilson. I assume Josh Jacobs might miss some time, but if he does play, then Jacobs is obviously the one you would be starting. The Vikings are league average as of late, so not a downgrade, not an upgrade, just maintaining expectations with Emmanuel Wilson. I think he'll be fine. I expect Chris Brooks to also get touches, so it'll be a split backfield. The backup in Green Bay will be a solid flex option. I would prefer Emmanuel Wilson. Next up is Kareem Hunt, who gets the Colts, who coming off the bye might be better on defense, but in the last month would rank as an above average matchup, 13th. They have given up 5 running back touchdowns in the last 4 games that would rank top 10 in that category. So Kareem Hunt needs a touchdown. Without one, he's not giving you over like 50 or 60 yards. However, as long as the touchdown does hit, the volume is carrying you to about a 12, 13 point projection, assuming there's a touchdown. So the Colts do give up touchdowns. I would assume Kareem Hunt will crack double digits. I'm probably going to start Kareem Hunt against the Colts. The Packers in the last month have gotten much easier to run against. They are giving up a lot more yards. So Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason played pretty well against Chicago last week, and perhaps you might trust them as solid flex plays. The last matchup I would consider maybe not as scary given how many points they've allowed in the last month. The 22.9 per game average is kind of enticing. It would rank top 11 in that time span. So perhaps you trust Aaron Jones a bit more, but Jordan Mason vulturing him on limited volume was pretty annoying. And then these last 8 matchups are all significant downgrades. I definitely don't expect the same high-end output out of these running backs as we've seen in the past. This 24th ranked matchup goes to James Cook against Houston. They are a bottom 10 spot. And in the last 4 games, only allowing 45 rushing yards per game. That is dead last in that category. You cannot run on Houston, but you can still score touchdowns somewhat okay. You can also catch the ball effectively against them, and for that reason, I'm not going to fully fade James Cook. He's still a lock in my lineup because of talent, but not going to hit the higher on his rushing yards projection. Not in this tough matchup. Jonathan Taylor is matchup proof, so although he gets Kansas City, a terrible matchup right now, bottom 3 in the last month, bottom 10 on the year, there's no way you're benching Jonathan Taylor. I would rank Christian McCaffrey above him this week because of his massive upgrade, but I still have Jonathan Taylor in the top 2 at the position. However, the Chiefs only allow 56 rushing yards per game in the last month. I will acknowledge it is hard to run on Kansas City, but if something's going to give, the Chiefs defense is going to break before Taylor gets shut down. Next matchup goes to Denver, who is on bye, so who cares? And then these bottom 6 matchups are big downgrades, but some of them are a bit easier as of late. The Seattle backfield is getting a little tougher, though. Tajay and Pollard, not players I really trust. Tajay catches passes and has a decent 7-point floor in full PPR, but that's not really valuable without a touchdown. I'm not trusting a Titans running back in this game. Bucky Irving and Rachaad White also get a tough matchup. The Rams are bottom 5 on the year, but they've started to give up some touchdowns lately, so perhaps you will trust Bucky a little bit more. If he's active, I would probably start him against the Rams. I think he'll be fine. Not great, but he's too talented to bench. He played amazing at SoFi last year when they made the trip out west. I think Bucky will probably be in your lineup if you waited for him to come back. But if not, Rachaad will still be interesting. Sean Tucker stole the show, but Rachaad is still, I think, the safer play in that backfield. Ashton Jeanty, though, gets a really tough matchup against Cleveland. But if you look at the last month, it's been a bit easier, ranks 19th, 18.9 points per game the last month. So Cleveland's run defense got a little vulnerable, got beaten by Derrick Henry and even Mark Andrews. A surprise rushing touchdown from Mark Andrews. So good luck with Jeanty. Last week was abysmal. I was dead wrong on Jeanty last week. And then these last 3 go to Bam Knight of the Arizona Cardinals. I assume he's the starter, but it's possible that Trey Benson comes back. I'm not sure what's going on with Imari DiMercado. He might miss time. The Jaguars, however, only give up 66 rushing yards per game in the last month. A really tough spot to run on them. So you're going to need a touchdown. I'm not convinced it'll happen. And their backfield is pretty random. So just a flex play at best. I would probably fade Bam Knight. But if it's Trey Benson, then I might feel a bit more confident about it. Detroit, though, is a terrible matchup for Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary. And their backfield is really annoying. It looks like it favors Tracy in terms of volume. But in terms of the guy who's been more effective and better for fantasy, that is Singletary getting touchdowns. But the Lions are a terrible spot. Only one touchdown allowed in the last 4 games to opposing running backs. So not expecting that to work out for either Giants running back. No thank you. If I can pass, I will. Last matchup to mention is New England. A very difficult matchup. Not giving up a single running back touchdown in the last month. That is dead last in that category. And then in terms of just rushing yards alone, less than 60 per game as well. So bottom 3 in every stat you look at in this matchup. I would not upgrade Chase Brown. Maybe the volume is tempting enough. He has been playing well, but I'm not going to bump up Chase Brown in the rankings. I think he'll be a low-end flex play at best against the Patriots. The worst matchup you can get is New England. Now we're moving on. We're talking about the wide receiver position. And just like the last 2 charts, we are showing you the same stats in blue, season-long averages in red, the last 4 games. So let's run through it. We got Dallas still ranking as the best matchup on the year, but they are starting to trickle back down. I think next week they're going to get caught by the Titans because the trends are really looking like opposite directions for the Cowboys defense and Tennessee. In the last month, Dallas is down to number 9, 28 points per game, which is still a big upgrade, still top 10 at the position. So I do trust that Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown will have a solid game, but I do think that the Cowboys aren't as exciting of a matchup as they were to start the year. They are giving up 163 yards per game on the season, and that is pretty high, definitely among the most. They are also giving up the most touchdowns to the position as well. 17 wide receiver touchdowns on the year. I think Saquon can struggle in this matchup, so I would predict at least 1 touchdown for an Eagles receiver, if not 2. I feel like the odds that both of them find the end zone are pretty high. So I'm going to trust Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown in my lineup. I know last week was bad, and the Eagles' offense looks like dog shit, but the Cowboys' secondary is still a top 10 matchup. Next upgrade, though, goes to Tennessee, who I think will be by far the best when the season is all said and done. Last month, they're giving up just shy of 40 points per game to opposing wide receivers. They get JSN lined up against them, so JSN is popping off. I could see 150 yards for JSN this week, and then I would expect some touchdowns for receivers as well. They've given up 14 on the season. So Titans probably allow Cooper Kupp or Rashid Shaheed to explode. This might be the game where Shaheed really gets going in the offense. But third best matchup is Washington, who are on bye. So sadly, a great upgrade is unavailable. And then fourth matchup goes to the Browns receivers. I don't know how much you trust Judy or Cedric Tillman. In general, we mainly trust Njoku and Fannin. But with Shedeur Sanders, perhaps anything is possible. It might be changing hands. Who's the top target under Shedeur Sanders? So a good matchup here, a lot of yardage, top 5 in both categories, and they have given up 13 receiver touchdowns on the year. I would expect one of these receivers to find pay dirt. On the season that has been Cedric Tillman, I could see an upgrade for a Browns receiver, but given it's Shedeur's first career start, I don't know exactly who is his favorite target at this point in time. Fifth best matchup this year is Pittsburgh, who ranked top 6 on the year. So going to trust to upgrade that the receivers against the Steelers are safe plays. Although Jamar Chase was shut down last week, T. Higgins had a phenomenal game. So maybe Odunze and DJ Moore, given their decoy usage lately, you don't trust. But the Steelers allow a league-high 184 receiving yards per game to the receiver position on average. So even if there's no touchdown for either of them, the yardage should be fine. The yardage should give you at least like 7.5 points. From a floor standpoint, I'm probably still going to start Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. The upside's pretty high, and the Steelers have not played as well on defense on the road. So trust Rome and DJ Moore this week. However, I don't know if I trust this Ravens matchup given who it is against. The Jets don't have Garrett Wilson. He's on IR. And although I have never forgotten him, I was shocked to see John Mechie score a touchdown. A.D. Mitchell also a factor there. Don't trust either Mechie or Mitchell, but the stats indicate the Ravens give up touchdowns, 11 to receivers this year. Maybe John Mechie is scoring for the second week in a row, but they get Tyrod Taylor. Don't know if that helps or hurts them. I would assume it helps because there's fewer scrambling rush attempts. Justin Fields is definitely tucking it and running more than Tyrod Taylor, but he still does that on occasion as well. I don't know exactly what to make of the Jets passing game. I think I'll just fade it, but if I had to trust one, it would be John Mechie. Chicago is a solid matchup, definitely a top 10 upgrade here for DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, and Calvin Austin, and they have allowed 14 touchdowns on the season. So Metcalf has been really underwhelming after his early season touchdown production. It's kind of evaporated. However, I don't know who the quarterback is this week, and Aaron Rodgers looks like he has a broken bone in his wrist, so might play through it. It sounds like he wants to, but historically he does own the Chicago Bears. That might gin up some high outcomes in the touchdown category. So good luck with DK Metcalf, but I don't think I'm trusting Roman Wilson or Calvin Austin. Ted McMillan, though, might get a significant upgrade this week against San Francisco. It is the second best matchup in the last month. So he played lights out last week. I don't know if I really trust Bryce Young, but Tet, I think, has to be in your lineup. I faded him a little too harsh. I had him low top 30, and he well outperformed. He was elite last week. So Tet had a breakout, and I believed in him coming into the year, but didn't expect that good of a game last week from Tet McMillan. So he's a must start. I would say Leggett is kind of interesting, but not sure I expect those outliers to repeat with the Panthers passing game. The Niners, though, are giving up 163 yards per game to the position this year. That does rank top 5 in that stat. And then they're also have allowed 11 receiving touchdowns in 11 games. So a touchdown should be there for Tet McMillan. If I had to guess, he'll have a good game. The Giants are a top 11 matchup in the last month, top 9 on the season. And just like the Niners, they're giving up kind of the same averages in terms of yardage and touchdowns. 11 touchdowns, 165 yards per game. So Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams, especially with no Laporta, if that happens again, I would trust 100%. Looks like Dan Campbell wants to dial up Jameson Williams a little extra compared to John Morton, the previous offensive coordinator. JMO has been a major upgrade since Campbell has taken over the play calling. So going to start him for sure. I'm not going to bet against Amon-Ra. I'll bet on his resurgence to happen pretty soon. Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, though, get a top 10 matchup against the Colts. And it has been a little more difficult lately. If Charvarius Ward returns, then now they have 2 legit corners, and what was a weakness is now a strength on defense. So watch out for Sauce Gardner covering up Rashee Rice. If Charvarius Ward is also active, that's going to be a problem. I would not upgrade Rashee or Xavier Worthy. Wanda Robinson and Isaiah Hodgins probably get a big upgrade this week, though, especially if Jameis Winston's the quarterback. I don't know if Jackson Dart will be held out again with his concussion. We have seen multiple games missed multiple times this year with concussions. So maybe you're going to trust Dart this week, but regardless of the quarterback, I do expect some touchdowns in the passing game. The Lions secondary isn't scary. They did kind of shut down Jalen Hurts last week, but they're pretty injured overall, and they've also had 13 passing touchdowns to go to receivers this year. So Winston could really dominate in terms of game script. I like the upside in the passing game a lot. And if Slayton's out, then Isaiah Hodgins is the next man up. So he has the deep down the field upside. I think Theo Johnson's interesting. I think Wandale's really good. And I do like a touchdown here for one of these receivers. So upgrade the Giants wideouts this week. In LA, I'm also upgrading Puka and Adams against Tampa Bay. Their secondary's been bad. Their defense is not really stepping up unless it's in division against a team like the Saints. Otherwise, the Bucs defense has been kind of vulnerable all year. So good matchup for Puka and Adams. The yardage should be there. However, Adams doesn't look healthy. He only had one catch for a touchdown last week. All his other targets didn't come down. And Puka is definitely the guy I trust more between the two. But both are still locks in the lineup. No brainers at receiver. Next matchup goes to the Cardinals receiving corps. So if Marvin Harrison Jr. is healthy enough, maybe he'll play. But he just had appendix surgery. I could see him miss a second week. And if he does, Michael Wilson is an elite play. I don't know if I trust him as much if Harrison is active, but even if he is, Harrison's not going to be 100%, and Wilson definitely earned some trust. He's a solid flex play. I would start him if I was in a pinch, especially if Harrison doesn't play. Probably a lock in the lineup. The Jaguars secondary isn't as impressive this season. So good for Michael Wilson, but if Harrison doesn't suit up, then even Dortch becomes appealing. Jacoby Brissett looks legit. Next matchup goes to Devon Vele and Chris Olave. Atlanta has been a top 4 matchup. Their defense, I think, is starting to give up on the coach. The season is over. They are not making the playoffs with their record, especially with London inactive. I don't expect them to play well this week. So the Falcons offer some appeal here. Olave, I would trust. The Falcons have also allowed 12 receiving touchdowns on the season. So Olave's looked really good since Shaheed's been traded. Tyler Shough's not looking bad. And then off the bye, they should be even more consistent. I like Olave a lot. I think he'll be a top 15 receiver this week, at least top 20. I think Olave will be a must start. T. Higgins and Andre Yoshivas of the Bengals this week face off against New England, and also a good spot for touchdowns. Jamar Chase is suspended for spitting on Jalen Ramsey, so he is not going to play. And then the Patriots have given up 14 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers on the year. So I like T. Higgins a lot this week. I think he'll be ranked top 10, no doubt about it. And then even Andre Yoshivas offers some appeal, could see some volume down the field. It might be Burrow's return that could be a little rusty, but even if it's Flacco, the floor is really high, the ceiling's elite, and with no Jamar Chase, I'm 100% endorsing T. Higgins. Next matchup goes to Egbuka, Tez Johnson, and perhaps Chris Godwin, who did practice last week but didn't play. I think Godwin might return for this Sunday night game at the Rams. But Egbuka, a lock in the lineup. The Rams are a top 10 matchup in the last month. They've allowed 6 receiving touchdowns on the year. Since the trade deadline, their secondary is getting a little bit better. They are catching more interceptions at least, but that doesn't impact the receiver position. So with Baker throwing the ball, I do trust Egbuka. He will still be a top 10 play, in my opinion. The Jets are a top 12 matchup in the last month, top 17 on the year. So if Rashad Bateman is inactive again, then Zay Flowers will be a must start. Flowers looks matchup proof. His floor is like 60 or 70 yards every single week. Even on just 3 receptions last week, Flowers still had 70 plus yards overall. So trust Flowers a lot. I think he is a top 20, 25 play at the worst. But Rashad Bateman might not be active. That would only help him. And then Darnell Mooney and Davis Sills, Kaderil Hodge will have to step up with no Drake London, who will miss at least one game with a back injury. So good luck trusting Mooney. Last time I did, he totally burned us, and I don't want to get fooled again. I do not like this matchup very much. It's gotten more difficult, down to just 21 points per game in the last 4 games. So off the bye with Kirk Cousins under center, I do not trust Darnell Mooney, but he has played much better with Kirk Cousins as opposed to Michael Penix. Maybe the volume will entice you enough for Darnell Mooney, but the Saints have given up 11 touchdowns to receivers this year. It's the last one where touchdowns might be a saving grace in this matchup. Next matchup goes to Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins against the Bills. The Bills are easy to run on. It's interesting. They're not terrible to throw against, but quarterbacks don't have a lot of success against Buffalo. So maybe you trust Nico Collins with your life. I'm still going to start him, but maybe not elite this week. And then Jaden Higgins has been playing better, but not good enough to lock in to the lineup. Maybe a pickup off the wire at the very least. But next matchup goes to CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, and the Philadelphia Eagles secondary has been difficult, only given up 5 touchdowns to receivers on the year. So maybe you just trust Lamb and Pickens that much. You don't give a shit. You're still projecting a touchdown for both, but I could see one of them kind of burn you. Quinyon Mitchell sometimes is a really tough matchup. Diggs and Mac Hollins, Kayshon Boutte get the next matchup. And now every matchup I think is a downgrade. They all rank bottom 12 at the position. So Cincinnati is a little difficult to pass against, only because of game script though. They're just so easy to run on and to exploit them with tight ends. The position that misses out is receiver. So game script might decide their fate, but Diggs, Hollins, and Boutte don't get a massive upgrade this week against the Bengals. Arizona is also slightly difficult, but their secondary's been very banged up lately, so I still might trust Jacoby Myers, Parker Washington, and perhaps Tim Patrick, but that's assuming Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't play. If BTJ is active, I would only trust Brian Thomas Jr. But receiving touchdowns are not what I would expect here. The Cardinals have only given up 5 wide receiver touchdowns on the year. Odds are that doesn't happen this week in Arizona. Green Bay is a slightly tough matchup, getting more difficult as of late. For Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, I just don't trust the quarterback, so I think I'll fade them. I think you kind of have to roll with Jefferson, sadly, in your lineup, but Addison I wouldn't expect to bail you out with a touchdown in this matchup. Seattle is a tough spot with no Calvin Ridley. It looks like the rookies are the guys you want. Chimere DK and Elic Ayamanor are not going to be productive, though. Not enough to trust. The Seattle Seahawks allow only 120 receiving yards per game to wide receivers. That ranks lowest in the league among active teams this week. The only teams giving up less are on bye. So Seattle, one of the biggest downgrades you can find this week. Bottom 4 points allowed last month. No thanks with Chimere DK and Elic Ayamanor. But Trey Tucker and Tyler Lockett also get a big downgrade. The Browns secondary is pretty stout. And in the last month, they actually rank as the toughest matchup overall. Weather has helped them. Matchups have helped them. But it's not like you care too much about trusting the Raiders wide receiving core. So they got an upgrade last week. Trey Tucker did find the end zone, but against the Browns, I wouldn't expect it. I would tell you to bench Trey Tucker and Tyler Lockett. Next matchup is another big downgrade for Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, but they do play against the Lions on Thanksgiving on Thursday, and I would assume they're saving Jaden Reed for that matchup. So that's not a player I'm expecting to come back. Romeo Doubs and Watson are the main guys here, and the Vikings have looked good at times. In the last month, they have given up a lot of points, but last week they did shut down the Chicago Bears passing game. So in division especially, I would expect their defense to step up. That's the only way they can win at this point. They do not trust their quarterback anymore. So Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, I wouldn't consider safe starts. I would fade them. Definite downgrade. If I can avoid it, I will. But interestingly, 3 out of the last 6 matchups on the chart are actually on bye. We're actually avoiding a lot of landmines at the wide receiver position. So thankfully, the Dolphins rank 27th on the year. They're on bye. That matchup is irrelevant. And so is the Chargers, who rank bottom 3, number 30 on the year. They're on bye. And then the last matchup you can mention is Denver, who are also on bye. So thankfully, 3 really big downgrades don't factor in this week. But there are still 3 teams. Last 3, I would pump the brakes significantly. We have Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, and Alec Pierce going against the Chiefs. The Chiefs secondary is totally legit, and they're giving up less than 125 receiving yards per game on average. So maybe because they have 3 good options, that number is going up. However, you're going to need to bet on touchdowns this week. I don't think there'll be a 100-yard receiver out of Indianapolis this week. I expect him to lean on Jonathan Taylor in order to get the win. So not ideal. I would definitely fade the floor on Pittman, Downs, and Pierce. Much riskier plays this week. And then I'm also fading the floor on Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall. The Panthers have a good secondary, can definitely limit you at receiver. So I would also expect diminished yardage. They allow less than 130 yards per game to the wide receiver position, but they have allowed 7 touchdowns on the season, and that is definitely below average, but maybe there's like a 50-50 shot that one of these receivers scores a touchdown. Ricky Pearsall, though, didn't look healthy enough last week to endorse. I would only trust Juwan if I was considering a Niners receiver, but I'm fading both of them hard in my ranks against Carolina. Last matchup, though, is deadly against Houston. I'm not excited about Khalil Shakir or Keon Coleman. It looks like Coleman is healthy enough to return to the lineup. It looks like he's off the injury report as of this recording, but he could definitely miss. He missed last week, and I'm not convinced he's 100%. And then Khalil Shakir literally had negative yardage last week. I would expect a minor bounce back, but against the Texans and Derek Stingley, that's the toughest spot you could find. So if you have a Bills receiver, I would not consider them a safe start at all. Last week it was Tyrell Shavers, not helpful whatsoever. So the Bills, all too random, and those are the downgrades and upgrades at receiver. Last position to mention is tight end, and we're going to run through the gauntlet. I don't think that the last 4 games are as valuable as those other positions, but I will still mention them. That is still what the stat shows on the chart. However, a lot of this depends on who you're facing, and then if you have just like one big blow-up game, it can skew the numbers. So I actually kind of care more about the season-long averages than the last month at the position. So I'll mention them. You can see clearly if they've been easier matchups lately or more difficult, but let's just focus on the blue stats for this position. The Bengals are the best on the year by 4 points per game on average compared to the next best matchup. So I'm definitely expecting a touchdown here for Hunter Henry. The Bengals have allowed 12 tight end touchdowns on the season, and then they're also giving up 79 yards per game. That does rank top 3 at the position. So expect a lot of production. Maybe even Austin Hooper does contribute against Cincinnati, but Hunter Henry going to be a great play. If you ask me, I think he'll be top 10. And then Trey McBride will probably be the best tight end to start, as always. But McBride gets the Jaguars this week. That is a great matchup, top 2 on the year, allowing 14.4 points. When in the last month, it's up to 20.7, and they have allowed 7 touchdowns on the season. That ranks second highest in terms of matchups. And with Brissett, a touchdown's like a money in the bank guarantee, especially if Harrison doesn't play. McBride is the best tight end in the league. But Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet get a big upgrade against Pittsburgh. The Steelers in the last 4 games aren't as easy, down to 13 points, but that's still a significant upgrade overall. They have allowed 7 touchdowns on the season, along with 68 yards per game to opposing tight ends. So unfortunately, Cole Kmet did factor in again last week. I was really convinced that Loveland had taken over, but I think it was just the injuries that were holding Kmet back. It looks like this is still a split tight end room in Chicago. So not safe starts, but very high upside. If you're willing to gamble, I would still prefer to bet on Loveland if I was chasing the upside. But next matchup is on bye. The Dolphins are a good spot, but they're irrelevant. And then the next matchup goes to Travis Kelce against the Colts, who allow the second most receiving yards per game this year to tight ends, 73 yards per game on average to tight ends. So Kelce, even without a touchdown, should play well this week, but in a marquee matchup like this, a lot of eyeballs, he usually plays well in these big games. So I like what I'm seeing from Kelce this season. I would trust him in the lineup. He's absolutely a top 10 tight end. But Chigo Okonkwo might play really well this week. The Seattle Seahawks are a great matchup, especially in terms of yards allowed. They're giving up 69 yards per game to opposing tight ends this season. So Okonkwo sometimes has to compete with Gunnar Helm. However, I trust him the most in this offense at the position. The Seahawks are averaging 13.3 points per game to the position. Next matchup goes to Jatavian Sanders against the San Francisco 49ers. And where it's enticing is in the touchdown department. The Niners have allowed 7 touchdowns. That is the third most to the tight end position this year. So unless Tommy Tremble vultures you, I could see a touchdown for Jatavian, but I'm not convinced that Bryce Young is going to throw for 400 yards again. Without that touchdown, you'll be screwed. So Jatavian still probably not worth a streamer this week. I don't think I'll start him, but maybe if you're desperate, could come off the wire and be a useful piece if you're desperate. But Luke Musgrave might also score a touchdown. The Vikings rank as a top 10 matchup this year and have been even easier in the last 4 games. They've allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends this season and 60 yards per game on average. So Musgrave could be involved, but last week it looked like they started to lose some faith. They gave the opportunity to Josh Whyle along with another backup tight end. Musgrave is just not the same player as Tucker Kraft. So limited upside, lower floor. I think I'll fade Luke Musgrave. The Commanders are an excellent matchup, but they are on bye, so irrelevant this week. Sadly, will not help anyone. And then the Arizona Cardinals are a good matchup this year, allowing 62 yards per game to the position, but I don't know what to make of this Jaguars tight end room. It looked like Brenton Strange was eligible to return last week and then suffered a setback. I'm not expecting him to come back anytime soon. And Hunter Long has missed some time as well. I don't know what to make of it. I don't think I'm trusting a Jags tight end, but it is a good matchup. There is solid yardage typically available against Arizona. Same applies for the Patriots matchup for Noah Fant. Maybe Tanner Hudson burns you, but I would trust Noah Fant the most. The Patriots are giving up over 60 yards per game, and we have seen Mike Gesicki really step up in the past when a receiver has missed time in Cincinnati, especially if Burrow comes back. That'll also help them. So with no Jamar Chase, he's suspended. I would say Fant is a very solid flex play this week against the Patriots. The yardage should go over at least 40. George Kittle also gets a solid matchup against Carolina. They're allowing 65 yards per game to the position, so top 10 in that regard. I trust Kittle to score a touchdown as well, especially with Purdy back at quarterback. I love George Kittle as a top 3 tight end rest of the season. Cade Otton gets an average solid upgrade against the Rams, so he's useful. I could see a shootout. I think Cade Otton is a solid start, but Kyle Pitts is a little more interesting knowing that London is going to miss the game. I don't really trust him though, and with Kirk Cousins it feels like a bigger gamble, so I think I'll ignore Kyle Pitts, but it is possible that circumstances lead to more volume. Dallas Goedert, typically a safe play, but against the Cowboys, maybe not as much. The Cowboys have only allowed 3 touchdowns on the season to the position, but also 60 yards per game. I wouldn't bet on Dallas Goedert to score a touchdown, but it's a good offense typically. It's been bad lately. I don't think I want to be pressing my luck. Goddard is really up and down, kind of hard to predict, and when he has a bad game, it is not useful at all. So expect more yardage rather than touchdown odds this week. Goddard, though, could also pop off for 100 yards and prove me wrong. Goddard is potentially matchup proof at times. But TJ Hawkinson gets an average matchup on the year, but terrible matchup as of late. The Packers are down to 4.5 points allowed to the tight end position in just the last month, but they were a top 10 matchup prior to that, and they're still league average on the season. So TJ Hawkinson, a big gamble. I don't think I'm going to trust him given the more recent trends for tight ends against Green Bay. They've been really bad. And then this next matchup goes to the Steelers tight end core, but honestly, it looks like Darnell Washington might be emerging as the more valuable guy. It's just a little too crowded to trust, and Chicago's only given up 3 touchdowns on the season. That's pretty low odds for a touchdown this week. So I'm not going to trust a Steelers tight end. And then against Denver, they're on bye, so that matchup is irrelevant. This next one, though, goes to the Lions tight ends, and if Laporta's inactive, then it might be wasted on Brock Wright. But the Giants are giving up less than 10 points on average this season, so not going to trust Brock Wright. Needs a touchdown. Doubt he gets it. AJ Barner is looking really involved, though, in Seattle. He had 10 receptions last week, along with 2 rush attempts. Barner is definitely a tight end you want over Elijah Arroyo, but against the Titans, it's an average matchup, no significant upgrade or downgrade. Andrews and Likely get a bit of a downgrade against the Jets, but it looks like Andrews is starting to be matchup proof again. Touchdowns are safe to bet on with Mark Andrews, but next matchup is kind of difficult against Detroit, but I could see this game be a bit of a shootout or at least a lot of garbage time, just leading to high outcomes. I still think Theo Johnson has some of the highest upside among all streaming tight ends, but Daniel Bellinger might also factor in. Darius Slayton is out. Mason Taylor gets the Ravens, and I don't like this matchup for him. Maybe he contributes with Tyrod Taylor. It could pivot in his favor, but the Ravens have only given up 2 tight end touchdowns all season, and I wouldn't expect that to work out for Mason Taylor. So I'll fade him, not going to bet on him. But against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think it's just too hard to predict the correct Rams tight end. Adams is a bit banged up, but there's 4 of them that they use. And I like the rookie Terrence Ferguson, but it can go to anyone. It is really just which player gets left open by the defense. So the Bucs actually defend tight ends kind of well. They've only allowed 41 yards per game to tight ends this year, and that does rank bottom 8 in that statistic. So tough matchup for yards. Maybe you get a touchdown, but it's really random. I would not trust a Rams tight end. Next matchup goes to Brock Bowers. He's matchup proof, so we're still going to start him, even though the Browns are a tough spot. And then Tyler Warren also gets a tough spot. The Chiefs only given up 2 touchdowns this season, but Tyler Warren, I think, is kind of matchup proof. I think he'll still give you at least like 60 yards. So I'll still start Tyler Warren. And then given the Dalton Kincaid injury, maybe you trust Dawson Knox, but against Houston, it is a tough matchup, and touchdowns are kind of slim to find against the Texans. They've only given up 3 tight end touchdowns in 10 games this year. So I'll probably pass on that. I wouldn't bet on it. But then this next matchup is the Chargers, who are on bye. A bottom 5 matchup is taken away. So these last 4 are the ones I'm most worried about, and touchdowns are really difficult to find. Against Las Vegas, they've only allowed 2 on the season, along with less than 40 yards per game to opposing tight ends. So maybe you trust David Njoku and Harold Fannin, but with Shedeur Sanders likely to get the start, I wouldn't trust the volume to be there as consistently as it was with Dylan Gabriel. Maybe it works out, but I don't know exactly what we're going to get in this matchup, especially from the tight ends who get a really, really tough matchup. I would probably fade them. Ferguson was bad last week, if not for a touchdown. He only had 16 yards on 4 receptions. So you can definitely get burned, but my preference would be David Njoku. These last 3 matchups have only given up 1 touchdown on the year to the position, so I don't expect elite production out of Juwan Johnson against the Falcons. But the Falcons have been getting a little easier lately, up to 9.8 points per game, and given how well Juwan has played with Tyler Shough after the Shaheed trade, the volume I think is still going to carry you. Juwan Johnson I think is a very solid high-end streaming option. So I actually like him still to be in the top 15 of my rankings, but I will downgrade him, bump him down a little bit lower against Atlanta. The Eagles are a very difficult matchup, allowing not just 1 touchdown, but also less than 30 yards per game on the year to tight ends. So just like last week, I would downgrade Jake Ferguson. He might bail you out with a touchdown, but I would project less than 25 yards for Jake Ferguson against the Eagles. But I have done research on Ferguson in this divisional game before, and I do remember that he actually plays really well against Philadelphia. He almost had a touchdown back in week 1, if not for some breakups in the red zone by the defense. He would have had a great game. Maybe I don't care as much because it's in division, and those stats I think carry more weight. But last matchup on the slate goes to Dalton Schultz, a really tough spot against Buffalo, who know how to defend the tight end position. They can't stop running backs, but they can stop tight ends. They are allowing 27 yards per game to the position. That is the lowest overall in the league this year. They're also only allowing 1 touchdown on the season. I would not expect an upgrade for Dalton Schultz, but he's been pretty involved in that offense, even with Davis Mills. So that is it for all of the matchups this week. Every single player and position, every single defense, and whether or not they're a good spot or not. So if you have any questions, let me know. I am not ranking the position in this video. I'm just giving you where there might be a really good upgrade and downgrade, and then that'll frame my logic the rest of the week. But last week, there were some instances that really paid off, did prove to be accurate, and then there were also a handful that proved to be irrelevant. They were dead wrong. So don't put all your stock into these statistics, but I do factor them in. They are relevant and do offer up some like interesting options off the waiver wire for flex plays you might be needing. So that's it for this video, but I will see you tomorrow with start-sit decisions for every single game in Week 12. And my name's Adam Mariancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.